Crimea is on fire. Special operations forces have destroyed the occupiers' oil depots, warehouses, and fuel trains. GUR drones have blown up one of the key petrochemical plants deep inside Russia's rear. The Russians are bypassing Ukrainian defenses and preparing a new strike on Zaporizhia. Putin is ready to attack NATO countries at any moment. Orbán's meeting with Trump is an attempt to regain influence and beg for relief from the new sanctions. Scandal in Prague. The new Speaker of Parliament ordered the Ukrainian flag to be taken down from the building. Shock in Finland. A teacher forced an 11-year-old Ukrainian girl to sing the Russian song Kalinka. The European Commission is closing the Schengen area to Russians. And Lavrov has fallen out of favor with Putin. Hello, my name is Yulia Kokan, and right now here are the top stories. But first, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we don't lose touch with you on YouTube. Russia is capable of attacking NATO countries at any moment, but the decision to act will depend on the position of its Western allies. This was stated by German Lieutenant General Alexander Solfrank in an interview with Reuters. According to him, it could be a small attack not far from Russia's borders. If
you look at Russia's current capabilities and military strength, Russia could launch a small attack on NATO territory as soon as tomorrow. A small, quick, regionally limited one, nothing major. Russia is too tied up with Ukraine for that.
Solfrank also noted that despite losses in Ukraine, Russia's air forces remain powerful and its nuclear and missile forces are intact. He also reminded that Moscow plans to increase the size of its army to 15 million. What do you think about such statements from the German general? Write your thoughts in the comments. I'll definitely read them. Right now, Russia is on the verge of its biggest conquest in Ukraine in more than 2 years of full-scale war. Journalists from the Wall Street Journal write that the Russians could fully occupy the city within a few weeks. And if the armed forces of Ukraine withdraw from Pokrovsk, they will have to give up the neighboring city of Mirnohrad as well. Throughout
the entire war, there has never been a time when the Russians suffered such heavy losses and still kept pushing forward. The casualty ratio could reach 10-1 in Ukraine's favor.
Meanwhile, Russian Z propagandist Kalashnikov claims that near Pokrovsk, Russia could lose as many troops as the Wehrmacht did in Poland.
What makes the situation so difficult for us? The thing is, we still haven't managed to completely encircle Pokrovsk geographically. And that's why we're forced to push them out, meaning we have to fight urban battles. And the losses there are very high, of course, on both sides. For us, they are comparable to Bakhmut, to the battles for Bakhmut. Remember, when Yevgeny Prigozhin was still alive, he announced that number, 20,000 killed just among Wagner fighters in Bakhmut. And there was probably no fewer from the units under the Ministry of Defense. And I want to remind you that when the Wehrmacht took Poland in September 1939, its losses were just over 20,000. So, in other words, one Bakhmut cost that much, so to speak.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian volunteer Serhiy Sternenko writes that, in terms of the pace of Russian advances, the Pokrovsk direction is not the worst. Sternenko says the situation is much more difficult further south, at the intersection of the Zaporizhia, Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk regions. Military analyst Stanislav Bunyatov also writes that there is a very real threat of a Russian offensive towards Zaporizhia.
While our attention is focused on Pokrovsk-Donetsk region, the enemy is rapidly advancing along the right flank towards Zaporizhia, bypassing the entire southern defensive line through the Dnipropetrovsk region.
Once again, the Wall Street Journal reports that Russian control over Pokrovsk opens the way to the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia regions, whose defenses are weaker. The increased movement of military convoys in occupied Berdyansk also indicates heightened activity by the occupiers in the Zaporizhia direction.
A large amount of engineering equipment is moving toward Polohi, but in the opposite direction, at least 4 platforms carrying destroyed armored vehicles have been transported from Berdyansk to the Ilyich Iron and Steelworks in Novozovsk over the past 3 days.
Deep state analysts reported that the Russians have captured territory in the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia regions. However, Ukraine's defense forces have denied this. In particular, Vladislav Voloshin, a representative of the Southern Operational Command, stated that this information does not correspond to reality. This is
the former Kakhovka reservoir, which is now almost completely dry. The area has become overgrown with dense vegetation, and the enemy is actively trying to use it to bypass our positions and approach the outskirts of Zaporizhia. In
Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region, fighting with the invaders continues. They have been pushed out from the northern part of the city. The situation remains unstable and tense. This was reported by Viktor Trehubov, head of communications for the Joint Forces Group.
As of now, November 6th, there have been several counterattacks in the northern part of the city. The Russians have been pushed out, but the situation remains unstable. Fighting continues in the city and the situation is changing dynamically. Although the Russians have been driven back, things are still difficult in the city.
In short, as noted by the General Staff, the situation is difficult but under control. I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. They are holding the front and standing up to a huge horde that vastly outnumbers them. That's why I urge everyone to support the armed forces of Ukraine. And if you can't do so financially, write them words of support in the comments. I know they're watching us. Ukrainian drones have flown directly into occupied Crimea. Air defense systems were active on the peninsula. The sky over the Black Sea region was on fire. Officially, the Russians claim to have shot down 5 UAVs, but sources say, get ready for more explosions coming from Crimea. At the same time, there were reports of explosions and fires in Russia's Bryansk, Kursk, and Kaluga regions. Details are still being clarified, but last night was a loud one for the occupiers. And that's not all. On November 6, 2025, Ukraine's GUR-MO long-range drone specialists carried out a successful strike on the Sterlitamak petrochemical plant located in Bashkortostan. This is one of Russia's key petrochemical industry enterprises. The plant produces goods for the needs of the Russian occupation army and the military-industrial complex. Ionol aviation gasoline synthetic polymers. It is reported that as a result of the strike on the enemy petrochemical facility, a fire broke out in one of the plant's workshops. In addition, on that same November 6th, Special Operations Forces struck enemy oil depots in occupied Crimea. SSO drones hit the Gvardeyskaya oil depot. A large RVS-400 tank filled with fuel was destroyed. In the same area, 2 trains carrying tank cars loaded with petroleum products detonated. Several oil depots and fuel storage facilities in Simferopol and the village of Bitumnoy were also hit. Tank farm facilities were destroyed. Special Operations Forces continue to act asymmetrically where the enemy least expects it. Meanwhile, in Volgograd, after a Ukrainian drone attack on the night of November 5th, an oil refinery was shut down. This was reported by Reuters. 2 units were damaged. The capacity of each reaches 20% of the plant's total output. And in Donetsk, a strike was carried out on a storage, assembly and launch base for Shaheds in the occupied city. So the question is, what exactly is Ukraine using against the enemy? Drones or perhaps, after all, Flamingo missiles? The answer is in our report.
A unique operation that lasted for months ended with a spectacular explosion in the middle of Donetsk. According to locals, nothing like this has ever been seen before in the occupied territories. Where did the strike hit? What was destroyed? And most importantly, what did the Ukrainian armed forces use?
Judging by the special effects and the massive explosions, Flamingo missiles were used.
So let's go through everything step by step. Last night, a massive explosion rocked Donetsk, after which, according to eyewitness videos, a fireball rose into the sky resembling a nuclear mushroom cloud, and windows were blown out in buildings several kilometers from the epicenter.
In fact, this is the area of the Oktyabrski airport. A large ammunition depot. Missiles struck there. There is no official information yet, but people are already talking about an ammunition depot. I watched the video. It's spectacular. Most likely it really was a very large missile or shell depot. Because in the video, just like in science fiction movies or computer games, there's an explosion, and then a second explosion. You can clearly see this glowing, rapidly expanding shockwave. In other words, the strike on the Donetsk depots was very successful.
A bit later, the head of the Ukrainian Armed Forces drone systems, Robert Magyar-Brody, clarified the situation. According to his information, the strike hit a large depot of Shahed-type drones where warheads were also stored.
The targeting of this complex objective turned into a painstaking intelligence operation lasting several months, pieced together from small fragments. Last night, it was carried out using appropriate strike assets by the Ukrainian Defense Forces missile troops.
Analysts note that despite the range of the Shahed drones, it was extremely important for the Russians to keep the drone depot close to the front line. After all, when the occupiers launch UAVs just a few dozen kilometers from the line of contact, the Ukrainian armed forces simply don't have time to respond quickly. As a result, the drones carry out their terror in frontline cities and also strike at the forward positions of our troops.
It's precisely the disruption of logistics for the supply of shells and rockets for drones to the Pokrovsk direction, to Pokrovsk itself. This is very important for us right now.
As for what the defense forces used to strike, our command chose not to disclose. One thing is certain, the attack definitely involved drones, but something else followed them as well.
As the footage from there shows, it was clearly not just drones at work. The UAVs, as can be understood, were distracting the local air defense. But the finishing blow was delivered by something resembling a rocket. It may have been a drone or possibly a missile. And
the fact that missiles were indeed used is also supported by Madia's reports about the participation of Ukraine's missile forces in the attack. I
don't think the warehouse with Shaheds was unprotected, that it was just some hangars. Most likely we're talking about some kind of underground bunker. And that's another reason why I think these were Flowbings. Of course, a Storm Shadow could have been used as well. And Storm Shadow would also be suitable here since they have a bunker busting capability. Nevertheless, the scale of the detonation shows, at least that's how it seems to me. If you look at the first second, the explosion was clearly bigger than just a couple 100 kilograms of a Storm Shadow warhead.
So yes, most likely these were indeed our Ukrainian flamingos. By the way, this is already the third time just this week that they've inflicted colossal damage on the Russians. But in Crimea, such power wasn't needed, so drones were sent to attack the peninsula. In occupied Simferopol, around 2:30 in the morning, a fire broke out at an oil depot. Presumably, this refers to Krimneftesbit in the area of the village of Bitumnoye. There were also reports of 4 strikes in Gvardeyskoye, after which smoke rose into the sky. There, the hits likely struck the local thermal power plant, which temporarily ceased operations.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And
About support. Reading the comments under previous episodes, I see that many of our viewers are from Kazakhstan, Moldova, Europe, and even the USA. We Ukrainians are very grateful to you for your support and proud to have such reasonable viewers. Write under this episode where you are watching us from and whether people there support our fight against the empire of evil. I always enjoy reading your comments. And for now, we continue. The most interesting part is coming up. In Luhansk, which is temporarily occupied by the Russians, the deputy prosecutor general of the so-called LNR, Kirilo Hrekov, was found hanged.
According to some reports, Hrekov was a Russian citizen and an appointee from Moscow who arrived in the region to carry out key official duties on behalf of the Russian authorities.
In addition, it is known that Hrekov had a tense relationship with local residents and officials, which repeatedly led to conflicts that most likely resulted in this tragic end. At present, the death of the high-ranking official is being concealed from the public. The official bodies of the so-called LNR are avoiding any comments. In short, a classic end to the career of a Russian official. Moscow is ceasing to be Russian. According to the Russian Academy of Sciences, a huge influx of migrants has poured into the capital, mainly from Armenia, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. Scientists from the Russian Academy of Sciences state directly that the ethnic composition of Moscow is changing, the gene pool of the so-called indigenous population is dissolving, and intergenerational differences are growing. And it all comes down to the birth rate. While the average Russian woman has 1 or 2 children, the wives of migrants are having 3. So now Moscow really is multinational. It's just that not all Muscovites have realized this yet. Russia's main tank manufacturer, Uralvagonzavod, has announced mass layoffs. This has been reported by Russian media. Allegedly, factory employees are sounding the alarm over the upcoming layoffs. The E1RU editorial office has obtained an order about this from the plant's executive director.
The order states, optimize the number of service centers, departments, institutes, and divisions of the company to 10% of their average headcount. The document specifies that a special commission will review proposals on who will be laid off. Those affected by the optimization are to receive up to 3 average monthly salaries as compensation.
Russian media report that the order must be carried out by February 2026. During this period, the company will also stop hiring new employees. At the same time, current OVZ employees fear that more than 10% of the staff may be laid off. According
to our information, the reduction for most departments amounts to up to 50% of their staff. As a result, capable and highly qualified specialists are losing their jobs. This was shared with E1RU by UVZ employees. UVZ confirmed the information about changes at the company, but declined to comment on what percentage of the staff would be affected by the optimization.
Apparently, such decisions indicate a lack of government funding and orders, making it impossible to maintain the current workforce even at a strategically important defense enterprise. Well, what can I say? Don't stop now. You can not only lay off workers, but go ahead and shut down your entire plant. Like, if you agree. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has fallen out of favor with Putin, according to the Moscow Times. He missed an important meeting of Russia's Security Council and lost his status as head of the delegation at the G20 summit. According to journalists, the reason for this fall from grace was the cancellation of Putin's meeting with Trump in Budapest after a tense conversation between Lavrov and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio on October 21st. It is worth noting that after the summit fell through, the US imposed sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil, explaining this by Russia's lack of interest in ending the war with Ukraine that Moscow had started. And right now, just listen closely. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán recently went on an official visit to the White House to try to arrange another meeting between Donald Trump and Putin. Before the meeting, Orbán stated that a meeting between the Russian and American leaders could take place in Budapest if several unresolved issues between the US and Russia are settled. In reality, however, the Hungarian Prime Minister will be seeking an exemption from American sanctions against Russian energy. According to Orbán's advisor, a new meeting between Trump and Putin could help put an end to Russia's war against Ukraine. At the same time, the media report that American President Donald Trump will demand that Orbán lift the blockade on Ukraine's accession to the EU right at the meeting in the White House. This was reported by the Atlantic Council. For the Hungarian Prime Minister, this visit is an attempt to restore influence and secure exemptions from the new US sanctions against Russia. Analysts believe that forcing Orbán to abandon his resistance to Ukraine's accession to the EU would be a diplomatic victory for Trump and a strategic success for Kyiv, Washington, and Europe. At the same time, as Bloomberg writes, American senators have already called on Hungary to stop buying Russian oil ahead of the president's meeting. So, ladies and gentlemen, shall we place our bets? Will the meeting between Trump and Putin take place? Share your thoughts in the comments. In Finland, a music teacher forced an 11-year-old Ukrainian girl to sing the Russian song Kalinka.
My daughter said they told her that everyone had to sing together, so she went to sing, but without any desire against her will.
It is known that the music teacher suggested singing the Russian song Kalinka, and 11-year-old Nicole said that she was from Ukraine and did not want to sing it. But the teacher replied that the war is not discussed at school and the girl still had to sing.
What outraged me was that my child was forced to sing in Russian at a Swedish school and that the teacher chose a Russian song for Finnish children without even considering that this is abnormal and amounts to spreading Russian propaganda and culture. This is exactly what we are now trying very hard to fight against.
After the public outcry, the school principal merely noted that the institution follows the national curriculum. That is why, in music class, they studied a Russian song as part of an introduction to the musical cultures of the world. At the same time, the Finnish education authorities pointed out that, due to the war in Ukraine, teachers can modify the curriculum and should be flexible in such cases. In the Czech Republic, the head of the Chamber of Deputies, Tomio Okamura, on his very first day in office, ordered the removal of the Ukrainian flag from the facade of the Czech Parliament building. It is also worth noting that even during his election campaign, Okamura stated that his party's participation in the ruling coalition would only be possible if all residence permits issued to Ukrainians were reviewed. The official is convinced that Ukrainians are allegedly depriving Czechs of jobs and hindering the resumption of Russian gas purchases. However, Czech parliamentarians did not support the decision of the new Speaker of the Chamber of Deputies to remove the Ukrainian flag from the parliament building. And now, not just one, but 3 Ukrainian flags are flying over the Czech Parliament building. Listen, gentlemen, am I the only one who feels like there's about to be a new addition to the Fico and Orbán team, so to speak? It looks like there's a new addition to the Orbán and Fico company. Meanwhile, the European Commission has approved new rules for Russians. Russian citizens will no longer be able to obtain Schengen multiple entry visas. Now, residents of the Russian Federation will have to submit a new application every time they want to enter EU countries. Moreover, all visa applications from Russians will undergo stricter checks. Also, countries have the right at their own discretion to shorten the validity of multiple entry visas already issued to Russian citizens. Oh, Russians, what's with the faces? Write to us about what we should change to become better. We will definitely take it into account. In the meantime, please like this video to support what we do. And be sure to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss future episodes. See you!